He left me pregnant at 24 and never looked back. I cried for a week. Then I got up, tied my apron, and raised our son alone for 7 years. I didn't need him. I refused to need him. Then one Tuesday morning, the door to my bakery swings open, and there he stands. Kang Jae-won. Older, colder, richer than God. And he's looking at my son, our son, like he's seeing the very thing he lost and never got over. He says he had reasons. He says he's sorry. He says he wants to fix it. But I spent 7 years fixing what he broke. So tell me, why does my heart still forget every single lesson the moment he walks into the room? The last thing Kang Jae-won said before leaving was, "I'll be back by morning." He never returned. I spent that winter morning in our small rented apartment in Mapogu watching the lights slowly fill the room, convincing myself everything was normal. The other side of the bed was cold, but I kept counting the ordinary sounds of the building. A motorbike outside, old pipes creaking, neighbors arguing upstairs, anything to avoid admitting that he was gone. His half-finished coffee mug sat on the table. I washed it as if keeping the apartment tidy might somehow bring him back. I imagined him walking through the door, shrugging off his coat, smiling that crooked smile that once made me feel like the most important person in the world. But the door never opened. By afternoon I had called his phone 11 times. When it finally rang once and cut off, the sharp click of the phone being switched off said everything he couldn't say to my face. I sat on the kitchen floor for hours, needing something solid beneath me. I was 24 years old. I was 8 weeks pregnant. And the man who had promised everything just days before had disappeared without a word. Later, people would ask if I saw it coming. The truth was that I saw the signs but didn't understand them. I saw how his voice changed when his father called, how he stared silently at his phone afterward. I noticed how talk of our future slowly disappeared after I told him about the baby. I told myself he simply needed time. Time to accept becoming a father the same way I was learning to become a mother. I never doubted that Jae-won loved me. What I didn't understand was the weight of everything against that love. His father's empire, family expectations, and a world I was never meant to belong to. That winter taught me something painful. Love can be real and still not be enough. 3 weeks later, I learned he had left the country entirely. A friend casually mentioned he had moved to the United States for the family business. A fresh start. That phrase shattered something inside me. Standing in a university bathroom gripping the cold sink, I made a silent promise. He would not take another morning from my life. I would build a life for my child. Steady, warm, and whole. So my son would never feel the absence of the man who left. And for 7 years I kept that promise. Until the morning a black car stopped in front of my bakery, and a man in a charcoal coat stepped out. Even before I saw his face I knew. Kang Jae-won had come back. And the life I had carefully rebuilt was about to change again. For 7 years, she rebuilt her life without him. Now the man who vanished without a word is standing at her door again. Will she forgive him? Or make him regret the day he left? Stay with this story to find out what happens next. Min-jun wanted a dinosaur cake for his 7th birthday. Specifically a roaring T-Rex with tiny arms that were sad but actually very strong. He explained this detail repeatedly throughout the week, worried I might forget. I never did. Nothing important to my son was ever forgotten. Late Thursday night, after he had fallen asleep, I stood in the kitchen of our apartment above the bakery carefully decorating the cake. Under the bright kitchen light, I slowly piped green buttercream over a chocolate sponge, shaping the roaring dinosaur exactly the way Min-jun had described it. When I finished, I stepped back to admire it. It was more than good, the kind of cake a child remembers years later. As always, I took a photo. My phone held years of these moments. Birthday cakes, first school days, lost teeth, and proud smiles. A private archive of a life that might seem small to others but felt enormous to me. Min-jun was turning 7, and that number felt heavier than the others. 7 meant he was no longer just a little boy. He was old enough to notice things, especially the fathers who appeared at school events and birthday parties. He had never asked me directly about his own father. Min-jun was perceptive, the kind of child who learned early to read the emotional weather of the people he loved. But I saw the way he watched other families. At a friend's birthday party, when another boy's father lifted him onto his shoulders, Min-jun observed quietly, not with envy exactly, but with the calm awareness of something missing. That quiet dignity broke my heart even as it made me proud. The next day his birthday party was small but joyful. 6 classmates, my best friend Hyunja, and our elderly neighbor Mrs. O, who had claimed the role of Minjun's honorary grandmother. The T-Rex cake was a complete success. The children laughed, played games, spilled juice, and filled the room with noise and happiness. By every measure it was a perfect day. Later that evening after the guests left, Minjun curled into my lap, something he rarely did anymore. In a small, careful voice, he asked the question he had carried quietly for years. "Yama, do you think he knows that today is my birthday?" I didn't ask who he meant. I told him the truth. I didn't know. Minjun thought about it, then nodded with gentle acceptance. "That's okay," he said. "Maybe he thinks about it anyway." Holding him close, I felt the weight of love, pride, and grief all at once. When he finally fell asleep, I allowed myself a moment to feel everything I had kept carefully contained for years. By morning, life would return to normal. The bakery would open, and my son would wake up still wonderful and still mine. For 7 years that had been enough. But something shifted inside me that night. A quiet tremor beneath the life I had built, like the first movement before an earthquake. And I didn't yet know how much everything was about to change. After 7 years of silence, I saw Kang Ja-won again on a quiet Tuesday morning in my bakery. Not in person but on the cover of Forbes Korea. The magazine had been left on the counter by my friend Hyunja the day before, and as I restocked the almond pastries, the cover caught the light. There he was. Older, sharper, and impossibly composed, dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of wealth and power. The headline called him the architect of the new Kang Empire, praising how he had rebuilt his family's business and transformed an entire industry. 7 years had changed him. The softness of youth was gone, replaced by a controlled, confident presence. But his eyes were the same, dark, calm, and quietly intense. For a long moment I simply stood there staring, almond croissants still in my hands, until the sound of the bakery door chiming snapped me back to reality. My regular customer, Mr. Beck, arrived for his usual morning coffee. I served him automatically, letting routine take over while my thoughts struggled to settle. I avoided the magazine for hours. When the morning rush finally ended and my assistant Jiyul took over the counter, I picked it up and read the article carefully, the way someone studies difficult news they've already prepared themselves to hear. The story revealed the life Jae-won had built after leaving. He had moved to the United States 8 years earlier, working quietly within the American branch of his family's logistics company. The timeline suggested he had planned his departure long before I realized he was gone. After 3 years abroad, he returned to Seoul when his father became ill. Following his father's death, Jae-won took control of the Kang Group and transformed it, restructuring its debts, expanding into green infrastructure, and acquiring tech companies that soon tripled in value. The article described him as a leader shaped by necessity and driven by results. Despite his rising power, his private life remained carefully guarded. No wife, no public relationships. Near the end of the article, a quote caught my attention. Asked what motivated him, Jae-won had paused before answering. "There are things I didn't handle well when I was young. I suppose everything since then has been an attempt to become someone who would have handled them better." I closed the magazine and turned it face down. To everyone else, it was simply a story about a powerful businessman. To me, it was a reminder of a life that had once intersected with mine, and then vanished. Still, I told myself it meant nothing. Seoul was a vast city. Jae-won lived in the towering corporate world of Gangnam, while I ran a small bakery in Seoul. Our lives now moved in completely different orbits. I repeated that reassurance to myself throughout the day, while picking Minjun up from school, helping with homework, reading him his bedtime story, and closing the bakery for the night. And for 11 days I believed it, until everything changed again. She spent 7 years building a life without him. And then one Tuesday morning his face appears on a magazine cover, older, richer, unstoppable. And the man who left her suddenly feels impossibly close. Will she stay unshaken? Or will the past finally catch up? Follow the story to see what happens next. The morning of February 23rd began like any other. I had been awake since 4:30, the bakery already bustling with ovens on and display cases half-stocked by sunrise. Jiyul arrived at 7:30. Regulars began at 8, and by 9 we had moved through the morning rush with practiced efficiency. It was a Tuesday. Nothing suggested disruption. At 9:47 the door chimed. I was at the far end of the counter writing the day's specials and didn't look up immediately. Jill began to greet the customer, but her words cut off mid-sentence. I looked up and froze. He was standing inside the doorway, still in his charcoal coat, impeccably tailored, exactly as it had been in the magazine photograph. But he wasn't looking at the pastries or the menu. He was looking at me. I had imagined this moment countless times over the past 11 nights, rehearsing what I would say, how I would act, whether I could remain composed. Yet here he was, and in none of my rehearsals had I been holding a piece of chalk. Seo-yun, he said. Just my name. And after 7 years, hearing it felt like a key turning in a lock I had long forgotten existed. I set down the chalk deliberately. We're out of the cinnamon rolls, I said, giving the moment only the smallest power. He wasn't here for pastries. He sat at the corner table. Jill brought him coffee without being asked. Another betrayal I noted for later. I finished the chalkboard and walked to the table, refusing to grant the scene more authority than it deserved. I said nothing more than necessary. How did you find me? It wasn't difficult. I wasn't hiding. I looked for you 6 months ago. I needed to. I had to find out if you were. I'm fine. We're done with that part, I interrupted. Up close the years had marked him. His eyes were the same, steady and intense, but his face bore the subtle lines of responsibility, hard choices and lost time. I know about Min-jun, he said quietly, the words carrying a weight unlike any other. You don't have the right to walk in here, I said. I know. I'm asking anyway. I've been doing everything right for 4 years. But I still wake up every morning knowing the thing I handled worst, the morning I didn't come back. I looked at him silently. My hands shook when I returned to the kitchen, not from fear or anger, but from the inconvenient, exhausting realization that after 7 years, I was not, in fact, finished with Kang Ja-won. The bakery hummed around us. Ovens warmed, Yule moving deliberately, but none of it could mask the shift that had occurred in that ordinary Tuesday morning. Some things I realized are never truly finished. I didn't tell Min-jun that Kang Ja-won had returned. Not on the day he first walked into the bakery and not the day after. I convinced myself I was waiting for the right moment, but in truth I was buying time. Holding the truth in my hands, weighing whether sharing it would be an act of honesty or an emotional detonation. Min-jun was 7 years old, extraordinarily perceptive and utterly unguarded. He loved fully without hedging or self-protective architecture. I could not risk giving him hope only to take it away, so I waited. Meanwhile, Jae-won returned. He came again on Thursday, then Saturday without directly asking to speak to me. He sat at the corner table, coffee and laptop before him, studying documents with the focused intensity of a man for whom idleness felt like failure. I served him both times, determined not to surrender that small battlefield of presence. You don't have to keep coming, I said on Saturday. I know, but you're not ready to talk. Being somewhere nearby seemed better than being nowhere, he replied. I'm not here professionally, he said. I'm not going to pressure you. I just need you to know I'm here. I'm not leaving again. I refilled his coffee before he left, silently noting the gesture. It was Min-jun who forced the true confrontation. The following Monday, he arrived at the bakery after school, backpack dropped, mid-snack, mid-explanation of a game he had invented. I was in the kitchen when the door chimed. I stepped out. Jae-won was just inside. Min-jun looked at him with curiosity, fearless and unguarded. Their eyes met and something clicked, a recognition that neither had fully expected. Hi, Min-jun said, straightforward as ever. Hi, Jae-won replied, careful and controlled, holding something fragile between them. Min-jun introduced Jae-won to the bakery in his usual way, remarking on the bread and making casual observations. Jae-won's composure cracked quietly, a scene giving way to something genuine. Then Min-jun asked the simplest, most innocent question. Do you know my Yama? Yes, Jae-won answered slowly. We knew each other a long time ago. Min-jun absorbed this and then asked quietly, carefully, the follow-up that landed like a hammer in the silence of the bakery. Did you miss her? Yes, Jae-won admitted, steady but costly. More than I knew how to say. Minjun considered it seriously, then returned to his chocolate roll, satisfied with the truth. I stood at the kitchen doorway holding my breath, watching my son eat, my past standing quietly in the center of my present. For the first time in 7 years I had no idea what came next. And in that uncertainty, terrifying and thrilling, I felt the beginning of something entirely new. On a quiet Wednesday evening after closing the bakery, Kang Jae-won remained at his usual corner table. Jiul had left with her knowing silence, leaving us alone. I had prepared words to maintain distance, but instead, I poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from him. "Tell me," I said. "No preamble. Tell me why." He held his cup, paused, and began carefully. "My father found out about you in my 4th month. Your name, your background, your family's finances. He presented me a file. If I stayed with you, acknowledged the pregnancy, he would destroy your family. Not me. Yours. Your sister's scholarship. Your mother's health situation. He had the means, and he would have followed through. I absorbed this, silent, the oven's warmth around us. So you left?" I asked. "So I left," he said steadily. "I told myself you were young, capable, that you and the child would be better off with a mother whole and undestroyed than with a father whose presence could cause damage." He admitted some of it was truth, some the self-serving story a coward tells himself. I've known that leaving without a word was cowardice, not sacrifice. No version of the story makes that right. I pressed him further. His father had died 4 years ago, and he had returned to Seoul, but not to me. I needed to rebuild the company first. I couldn't come to you broken. I had to make right the practical wreckage before asking you to consider forgiving the personal one. I searched for dishonesty but found none. It aligned with what I knew of him, pride and conscience intertwined. I reminded him of what I had accomplished while he was away. My father's business recovered, my sister got her scholarship, and he acknowledged knowing every detail. We discussed possibilities. Perhaps his father never intended to follow through. Perhaps it was a calculated threat. He admitted he would never know, only that at 26, he had been terrified. Not for himself but for me. In that small bakery, stripped of all performative layers, he looked like a man who had carried a heavy burden for years and was finally putting it down. I did not forgive him that night. Forgiveness does not arrive on command, but I sat back down and we talked until midnight. When he left, stepping into the cold February street, he turned once to look, not expectantly, but to mark the place he might return to. I leaned against the glass door afterward, feeling something inside shift. Not break. Not dissolve. Just move, making room for a question I had not dared ask in 7 years. What if he left to protect her? But the truth can't stay hidden forever. Will love survive the years of silence? Step into the bakery where secrets unfold and hearts are tested. It began with a dinosaur book. Jae-won started coming to the bakery on Saturdays, deliberately choosing days when Minjun would be present. One morning he arrived carrying a hardcover about prehistoric creatures, showing he remembered Minjun's passions. What followed was 45 minutes of Minjun lecturing Jae-won on dinosaurs, extinction events, and the overlooked fact that birds were technically dinosaurs. Jae-won listened intently, awkward on a small stool but fully present, a man learning patience in a realm far removed from boardrooms. By the 3rd Saturday, Jae-won had begun to understand Minjun's preferred style of interaction. Side-by-side activity rather than face-to-face conversation. He brought small things to do. A model kit, a deck of cards, even a paper crane he folded himself. When Minjun asked where he learned it, Jae-won shared that his late mother had taught him, offering a personal story without prompting. Minjun carefully placed the crane on the table, declaring, "She's sort of still around." In the crane. The moment was quiet, intimate, and required no words. A few weeks later, during a gray, drizzling Saturday, Minjun invited Jae-won to see his room. Jae-won asked permission with a subtle, respectful glance at Seo-yeon, and she allowed it. Upstairs, Minjun guided him through his space, narrating every detail with enthusiasm. When they returned, Minjun demonstrated an elaborate 4-step handshake of his own design, insisting Jae-won practice step 3. Jae-won approached it with full concentration, a mixture of effort, care, and sincerity. Minjun patted him encouragingly, showing patience and the quiet power of a child's gentle guidance. Afterward, Jae-won looked at Seo-yeon with an expression stripped of any pretense. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now navigating the fragile terrain of fatherhood. He quietly thanked her for allowing Min-jun to make his own choices, acknowledging her trust and restraint. Seo-yeon's response, "Don't make me regret it," was simple but honest, and Jae-won received it as intended. Not as a threat, but as a measure of accountability and understanding. Over these Saturdays it became clear that Jae-won was learning not just about dinosaurs, but about connection, patience, and the slow, careful ways of being a father. Step by step, guided by a 7-year-old, he was discovering what it meant to hold another life gently, earnestly, and responsibly, while Seo-yeon watched quietly, recognizing both the progress he made and the subtle shifts in her own guarded heart. Hyunja arrived at my apartment on a Friday night with wine, and the kind of presence that made it impossible to avoid truth. I let her in partly for the comfort only an old friend provides, partly because she'd shared these moments with me before. After Jae-won left, sitting with me on this same sofa, bringing presents instead of platitudes. She poured, sat, and demanded, "Talk." I tried to resist. "There's nothing to say," I told her. But Hyunja's observation was precise. Jae-won was in the bakery 4 times a week, Min-jun and he had a secret handshake. I refilled his coffee without being asked. There was everything to say. I confessed what I had been processing, that Jae-won had explained why he left. His father had discovered everything about me, my name, my background, my family, and threatened ruin if he stayed. Jae-won believed the threat and left, thinking it was the only way to protect me. He admitted the leaving without a word was indefensible, but he had never tried to rewrite it. I believed him, not blindly but in the deep essential truth of it. Hyunja pressed on. And Min-jun? The answer tightened my chest. Min-jun lit up whenever Jae-won arrived. He tried to hide it, maintaining dignity, but I had seen it, understood it for 7 years. That made everything harder. Because if this were only about me, I would choose caution, the life I had built, good, sufficient, real. But it was not only about me. It had never been just about me. Letting Jae-won in risked Min-jun losing a father he had finally known, even if briefly. My gut told me that Jae-won would not leave again, that he had come back fully aware of the stakes, with transparent intentions. And my gut trusted him, though not without fear. That terrifies me, I admitted. Hyunja simply nodded. Drink your wine. 2 weeks later he kissed me. It was soft, brief, asking rather than taking. I did not stop it, but I did not continue it either. I sat very still, aware of the walls I had built, the careful distance I maintained. He did not demand their removal. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that I'll still be on the other side of them in the morning," he said, leaving me with the weight of choice. Alone in the empty bakery, I finally acted. I typed a message into Min-jun's school calendar, confirming a father and child event. My fingers hesitated. I typed. For the first time, I allowed the smallest possibility, that Jae-won might belong here again. It began with a phone call I wasn't meant to hear. Min-jun had a mild fever, the familiar kind that arrives every winter, hot forehead and heavy eyes. I had closed the bakery early, settled him on the sofa under the good blanket with his dinosaur book and honey ginger tea, and called his school to explain his absence. Jae-won had been coming more regularly by then, twice weekly dinners, helping Min-jun with homework, learning that my son required 3 readings of a chapter to feel satisfied. That evening, he arrived to find Min-jun horizontal and mournful. Without hesitation, Jae-won sat on the sofa's edge, hand automatically on Min-jun's forehead, checking his temperature like a parent instinctively does. I retreated to the kitchen to compose myself. 38.4, he noted. Min-jun complained his ears hurt, to which Jae-won responded with humor, acknowledging each one. The warmth of the kitchen, the fragrance of soup, the February wind outside. It all settled around us like a fragile, complete bubble of domestic intimacy. Then Jae-won's phone rang. I didn't intend to listen, but I heard him quietly excuse himself. His voice, clipped and final, carried authority I had never questioned. He refused a business decision that conflicted with his presence here. "I have a son with a fever and I am not leaving," he told the caller. The certainty, the prioritization of family over work, struck me like a revelation. He returned to the sofa and picked up the book, resuming reading seamlessly, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. I carried the soup, set it on the coffee table, and joined them in a shared silence that spoke louder than words. After Minjun fell into deep sleep, arms around his dinosaur book, Jaewon and I sat at the kitchen table with cooling tea between us. I asked the question that had been forming for years. If I let him in fully and something went wrong, what would he do? He paused, choosing his words with care. I stay, he said firmly without hesitation. Not because I have to, not because of Minjun, though he is reason enough, but because you are the only life I have truly tried to live. I've spent 8 years constructing a substitute, and I know the difference now. I will spend however long it takes proving that distinction. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. He held it steady, fully aware of its significance. Okay, I said, simple yet encompassing everything. Outside, Seoul was quiet, the wind had stopped, and our son slept peacefully, fever-breaking, arms around his book. I didn't let go of Jaewon's hand for a very long time. The decision had been made. He had chosen us fully finally. Spring arrived in Seoul with its usual insistence, cherry blossoms bursting along the Han River paths. Minjun, having done research with Mrs. O and a nature documentary, declared it peak bloom weekend and insisted we go. We walked together. Minjun in the middle, one hand holding mine, the other pulling Jaewon toward each new cluster of petals. He tilted his face to the falling blossoms, arms slightly out, fully present in the moment. Jaewon watched him, noting how much of Minjun's attentiveness came from me, and I noticed him noticing, the subtle recognition quiet but real. Minjun's direct question, whether Jaewon would be there next year, brought an emotional moment. Jaewon crouched to Minjun's level and quietly assured him that he would be. Minjun, satisfied, grabbed his father's hand and pulled him to the next group of blossoms, full of energy and joy. Watching them, I reflected on my own journey. The kitchen floor in February, the ceiling turning gray and gold, the precise moment I had chosen to stop being destroyed and start building. The life I had rebuilt, the bakery routines, early mornings, birthday cakes, bedtime chapters was real, whole, and enough. And now it had room for more. That November, Jaewon and I were married. The ceremony was small, deliberate, and intentional, with Hyunja's wholehearted tears, Mrs. O's magnificent vintage hat, and Ji-Yul's unexpectedly funny toast. Minjun, 8 years old now, carried the rings with solemn focus, entrusted with his critical role. At one point he approached me asking simply, "Are you happy?" I replied fully and without hesitation. Minjun nodded, satisfied, then immediately pulled out a deck of cards to show me a trick he had been practicing, blending his curiosity, focus, and joy seamlessly into the moment. Later, after the guests had left and the venue was quiet, Jaewon found me by the window. We stood together silently, looking over Seoul. He recalled the morning he first returned to the bakery and how my words, simple and unwavering, had challenged him. I reminded him I had Minjun then, and he acknowledged that my being fully myself was always enough. I leaned into him and he put his arm around me. We stood together in quiet, deep trust, watching the city that had witnessed our years of separation, growth, and reconnection. Inside, our son slept peacefully, and for the first time everything felt complete. Home had always been here, and now it was enough. After years of waiting, heartbreak, and quiet rebuilding, Seo-yeon, Jaewon, and Minjun finally find home in each other. Their journey proves that love isn't just found. It's earned, nurtured, and chosen every day. Don't miss the next chapter of this heartwarming story. Subscribe now and follow their journey of family, forgiveness, and finding enough.